Seraphine Cole had learned, a long time ago, that the best way to survive was to be invisible. She did not speak unless spoken to. She did not eat until everyone else had finished. She woke before the sun and worked until the stars came out, and she never, not once, asked for anything in return. She had been living this way for as long as she could remember, quietly, carefully, like a girl who understood that the world did not have room for her and had decided to take up as little space as possible. She was an Omega. The lowest rank in the Crescent Moon Pack. That was what they told her, and after enough years, she had almost stopped questioning it. Almost. There were moments, small ones, easy to miss, when something moved inside her that she could not explain. A warmth behind her eyes in the dark. A strange silver light that sometimes flickered at the edge of her vision when she was frightened or exhausted. She had learned to ignore those moments too. In a place like this, being different was not a gift. It was a reason for people to come after you. And they had come after her, in the end. It happened on a Thursday night in late autumn. Seraphine had gone to collect firewood from the eastern storage shed, the one behind the Pack Elders' Hall. She was not supposed to be there at that hour. She knew that. But the main supply had run out and the healer's cottage needed warmth and no one else was going to do it, so she went. She heard the voices before she saw anything. She should have turned around. She knew, in the way a person knows when a storm is coming, that she should have put her head down and walked away. But the elder's voice was the one she heard, Elder Roland, the oldest and kindest man in the pack, the one who had once given her an extra piece of bread when she was 12 years old and too proud to ask for food. His voice was shaking. She looked through the gap in the old wooden door. Alpha Derek Holt was standing over Elder Roland with something cold in his eyes that Seraphine had never seen so clearly before. She had always known he was a hard man. She had always known he was not kind. But what she saw in that moment was something else entirely. It was a man who had already made a decision. A man who felt nothing about making it. She did not scream. She pressed herself against the outside wall and she did not breathe and she waited, and then she ran. She ran back to her small room at the edge of the pack quarters and she sat on her bed in the dark and she tried to think. She did not get the chance to think for long. 3 days later, Alpha Derek called the entire pack together in the central clearing. Seraphine stood at the back, as she always did, and listened as he read the charges against her in a voice that was calm and smooth and completely without guilt. Treason. Deception. Disruption of pack order. She looked at the faces around her. Some of them would not meet her eyes. Some of them looked at the ground. Her only real friend, a girl named Bryn, was crying silently at the edge of the crowd. No one spoke in Seraphine's defense. Not one person. She understood then that she had two choices. She could tell the truth and be killed for it before morning. Or she could be silent and survive whatever came next. She chose silence. She chose the chance of living. The bond-severing ritual was the worst thing she had ever felt. It was like having something warm and real pulled out from inside her chest, like roots being torn from the ground. The pack marks on her skin faded one by one. She stood straight through all of it. She did not give them the satisfaction of watching her break. Then they drove her out past the pack borders and left her in the dark. The forest was not kind to her. She walked for 3 days without stopping for more than an hour at a time. She found water from a stream and berries she recognized from the healer's lessons. She slept sitting up against trees because lying down felt too much like giving in. Her side hurt, she had not noticed in the confusion of the ritual, but there was a wound there, not deep but untended, and by the second day it was worse. She told herself to keep moving. She told herself that she had survived everything else and she would survive this too. She said these things quietly, to herself, because there was no one else to say them to. On the third night, her legs gave out. She did not fall dramatically. She simply folded, slowly, at the base of an ancient oak tree near a wide, cold river. She leaned her back against the bark and looked up through the branches at a sky full of stars, and she thought, with a strange and peaceful clarity, that she was very tired. That she had been tired for a very long time. She closed her eyes. She did not know what happened next, not exactly. She felt warmth move through her from somewhere deep, not from the outside, but from within, like a door opening in a room she had always kept locked. Her eyes opened on their own. The forest around her was lit with a soft silver light, and she realized after a moment that the light was coming from her. From her eyes. She raised her hand and looked at her palm, and the silver light moved across her skin like water in moonlight. She had no idea what it meant. She was too exhausted to be afraid of it. She let her hand fall and she breathed slowly, and she stayed very still. 3 mountain ranges away, in the center of a room filled with maps and serious men, Alpha King Cashin Voss felt something he had not felt in 7 years. He felt a pull. It was not a small thing, the way people sometimes described a feeling as pulling at them. This was like a rope tied around his chest being yanked from the other end. It stopped his breath. It stopped the conversation in the room. The men around him went quiet, watching him with concern, because in all the years they had served under him they had never seen him pause like this, not in battle, not in loss, not once. He did not explain. He walked out of the room. He shifted and ran, and he did not stop running for hours. Through forest and mountain and frozen river valley, following something that had no name, that gave no direction except forward, always forward, following the thread of it through the dark like a man who has been lost for years and has suddenly remembered the way home. He found her by the river. She was sitting against an oak tree with silver light coming out of her eyes, and she was clearly very unwell, and she was the most extraordinary thing he had ever seen in his life. He stood at the edge of the tree lean and looked at her, and something in his chest, something he had spent 7 years carefully sealing shut, cracked open. He knew what this was. He had stopped believing it would ever happen to him. He walked to her slowly, so as not to frighten her. She looked at him with those silver eyes and he waited for her to speak. She didn't. She was too weak. So he did what came naturally. He took off his coat and wrapped it around her and gathered her up carefully, the way a person carries something they are afraid of dropping, and he turned and ran home. He ran the entire way. Seraphine woke up in a bed. Not a small, narrow one like she was used to. A real bed, wide and soft, with clean white sheets that smelled like lavender, in a room with high ceilings and tall windows and a fire burning in a stone fireplace across from her. Sunlight was coming through the curtains. A glass of water sat on the table beside her. Her first thought was that she was dreaming. Her second thought was that she needed to leave immediately. She was halfway across the room when the door opened. The man who walked in was tall, dark-haired, with the kind of quiet presence that did not need to announce itself. He was dressed simply, dark clothes, nothing royal about them, but he carried himself the way mountains carry themselves. Like something that has been there for a very long time and plans to remain. He stopped when he saw her standing there. He did not move closer. He looked at her with gray eyes that were careful and steady and said, in a voice that was surprisingly calm for a man his size, "You are safe here. No one is going to hurt you." She stared at him. "Where am I?" "My home," he said. "My name is Cashin." She did not know why, in that moment, something in her went quiet. Not relaxed, she was not ready to relax. But quiet. Like a storm that pauses before deciding which direction to go. "Why did you bring me here?" she asked. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Because I found you, and I could not leave you there." It was not the whole answer. She could tell that. But it was a true answer, and she had not heard many of those in her life, so she let it stand for now. She stayed for 3 days before she learned the full truth about who he was. She had suspected he was powerful, the house alone made that clear. But when his doctor sat with her and explained what the silver light meant, what the mark on her shoulder was, what it was called and why she had carried it all her life without knowing, she sat very still for a long time afterward and said nothing. "The silver bloom. A rare mark," the doctor said gently. "Carried by wolves who are born Omega but destined for a mate of the highest rank. The mark suppresses everything, the wolf, the power, the full strength of the person, and holds it, waiting. It waits for the bond to trigger it. It waits for the right person." Seraphine had spent her entire life feeling too small for the world around her. She had believed it was simply who she was. She had accepted it, because what else do you do with a truth that seems unchangeable? But it had not been the truth at all. She had been waiting. Without knowing it, without choosing it, she had been carrying something extraordinary inside her and living as if she were nothing. The anger she felt about that was quiet and deep, the way the anger of people who have been patient for too long often is. That same evening, Cashin came to her and asked if she would tell him what had happened. He did not command her. He did not sit across from her like a king receiving a report. He pulled a chair close to where she sat by the window and he asked, simply, if she was willing to talk. She was not sure why she said yes. Perhaps because he had asked instead of demanded. Perhaps because she was tired of carrying it alone. Perhaps because the way he looked at her, like someone who genuinely wanted to understand, not to use what she said but just to know, was so different from anything she had experienced before that she did not know how to say no to it. She talked for a long time. She told him about the pack, about the years of work and silence, about Elder Roland and the shed and the door and what she had seen. She told him about the trial that was not a trial and the faces that had looked away in the cold forest and the 3 days of walking. She told him about Bryn, crying at the edge of the crowd with nothing she could do. He listened to all of it without interrupting. When she finished, the fire had burned lower and the room was darker and he sat very still for a moment. Then he looked at her and said quietly, "Everyone who stood in that circle and said nothing will answer for it." She believed him. She did not know yet whether to feel relieved or frightened by how much she believed him. She decided to feel both. What happened next moved faster than Seraphine expected. Cashin called a formal tribunal under Supreme Pack law, an authority that sat above every alpha, every pack council, every territorial agreement in the wolf world. The summons went out and could not be ignored. Alpha Derek Holt arrived at the estate 4 days later with his chin lifted and his eyes cold, carrying the confidence of a man who had never been truly held accountable for anything. He looked at Seraphine once when he walked in. Just once. She did not look away. Bryn arrived separately. She had traveled on her own, carrying a small leather journal that had belonged to Elder Roland, a journal she had taken from his room the night Seraphine was banished, not knowing exactly why, only knowing it mattered. Inside were the Elder's own words, his suspicions about Derek's dealings, written down carefully in the days before his death, as if some part of him had known he needed to leave a record. The proceedings were thorough and formal and attended by senior leaders from 3 neighboring territories who watched everything and said little. The evidence was presented piece by piece. Bryn spoke. The journal was read aloud. Other witnesses, people who had known things and stayed quiet out of fear, found their courage when they understood that the Alpha King himself was listening. Derek's story began to fall apart slowly, then all at once, the way a structure falls when the one thing holding it up finally gives way. Luna Mira broke before he did. She made a full confession in a flat, tired voice, like a woman who had been carrying something very heavy and had simply decided to put it down. Her account filled in every gap. Derek Holt was stripped of his title, his rank, and his territory. The Crescent Moon Pack was placed under a formal council until new leadership could be properly chosen. Those who had participated in the cover-up faced consequences according to their level of involvement. It was not a perfect justice, no justice ever is. But it was real. It was documented. It was witnessed. And it could not be undone. Bryn wept openly in the middle of the proceedings and did not apologize for it. Seraphine, sitting beside Cashin, reached over and took her friend's hand and held it tightly. The formal part of things ended. The quieter part began. Seraphine stayed. She had nowhere else to go, at first, but as the days passed and the reason to leave became less urgent, she realized she was not looking for one. She was learning what it felt like to wake up in a place where no one needed her to be invisible. Cashin did not rush her. He did not declare things or make demands. He simply existed near her, at breakfast, in the evenings by the fire, in the garden on the afternoons when the winter sun came out pale and clean and the world felt more honest than usual. He was a quiet man when he did not need to be otherwise. She had not expected that. She had not expected a lot of things about him. She had not expected the way he laughed, rarely, but fully, when something genuinely caught him off guard. She had not expected that he cooked his own breakfast on Sunday mornings because he found it calming. She had not expected that he kept a small notebook of things he wanted to remember, quotes, observations, the names of people who had been kind to him. She had not expected to feel safe. Not safe like a lock on a door. Safe like a room that is warm when you come in from the cold. Safe like someone knowing your name and saying it the right way. He told her things too, as the weeks passed. About the mate he had lost 7 years ago, not to betrayal but to illness, sudden and without warning, and the guilt he had carried since, the feeling that grief was something he owed her and could not stop paying. About the loneliness of authority, the way it keeps people at a distance even when you do not want it to. About the night he ran through 3 mountain ranges following a feeling he could not name, and how he had known, the moment he saw her, that his life had just changed in a way that could not be reversed. "Were you frightened?" she asked him once. "Yes," he said simply. "I had stopped letting myself want things. And then, suddenly, I wanted something very much." She understood that. She understood it deeply. The bond between them completed gradually, the way real things tend to happen, not in a single grand moment but in many small ones that add up to something unshakable. The morning she laughed at something he said and realized she had forgotten to be guarded. The night she had a bad dream and found him already sitting outside her door, not because he had been asked, but because he had heard and come. The afternoon she found him in the garden, just sitting in the sun, just being a person, and she sat beside him without saying anything, and they stayed that way for an hour, and it was enough. On a quiet evening near the end of winter, Cashin asked her to walk with him. They went to the garden, where the frost was melting and the first small signs of green were beginning to push through the cold ground. He stopped walking and turned to her and, to her complete and genuine surprise, he went down on one knee. Not as performance. Not as announcement. There was no one watching. Just the fading evening light and the soft sound of the wind and his steady, honest eyes looking up at her. He told her that he was not asking because of the bond, or because of the mark, or because of any rule or destiny or ancient law. He told her that he was asking because of her, because of who she was, because of the way she had faced everything that had tried to break her and had not let it make her cruel, because of every quiet and remarkable thing he had learned about her in the months since he had found her by that river. He asked her if she would stand beside him. His Luna. His equal. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "Give me a few days." He blinked. Then he nodded, and stood, and respected it completely. She thought for 3 days. She sat with the question honestly and seriously, the way she approached everything that truly mattered. She needed to know that her answer came from a clear and settled place inside her, not from gratitude, not from fear of being alone, not from the pull of a bond she had not asked for. She needed to choose. On the 3rd morning, she found him at the breakfast table and sat down across from him and said, "Yes." He put down his cup. He looked at her. And he smiled, the full kind, the rare kind, and she decided quietly that it was worth every careful day she had ever survived to arrive at this moment. The formal announcement was made at the Supreme Alpha Council in early spring. Every major pack leader in the territory was present. They had all heard her name by now. Seraphine Cole, the Omega who had survived a corrupt banishment, who carried the silver bloom, who had stood in a tribunal and told the truth in front of the most powerful gathering in the wolf world without flinching. She stood beside Cashin in the great hall, in silver and deep blue, her hair down for the first time in as long as she could remember. Her hands were steady. Her breathing was slow. She was taller than she felt, and she felt tall. He took her hand just before the announcement was read. She did not need him to. But she held it back. When her name was spoken, Luna Queen Seraphine Voss, and the room responded with formal acknowledgement, she felt something move through her that was not pride, exactly, and not relief, exactly. It was more like completion. Like a sentence that had been waiting for its last word. She thought, briefly, of the girl she had been. Kneeling in the mud. Surrounded by silence. Being told, without words, that she was nothing and that nothing was all she would ever be. She thought, that girl did not disappear. She thought, that girl became this. And standing in that hall, with her hand in Cashin's and the whole wolf world watching and her friend Bryn somewhere in the crowd probably already crying, Seraphine Cole allowed herself, for the first time in her life, to take up all the space she deserved. It felt, she thought, exactly like coming home.